around and just kind of take you through the players and the things, and I will get to in what Race to the Top is. For those of you that don't understand how education works in the state of Missouri, I would imagine you all have a good idea. I'm sure you've got family or friends that are kids and been in public school. We all have a local school board. At the state level, there is a department called DESE. Stands for the Missouri Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. DESE is ran by a woman by the name, or she is the Commissioner of Education. Her name is Dr. Nicastro. It is a political appointment appointed by the governor, and I think there's a board of people that are reflective that appoint her. So you can probably guess what political viewpoint she's coming from. I can't find out a lot of information about her, and I'm not an expert on her, so I'm not going to pretend to know all of her positions on the issues, but judging from what I'm seeing by what she's getting into with Race to the Top, I would venture to say that she's probably Democrat for sure. She came from a suburban school district over by St. Louis and was appointed in 2008 when Governor Nixon took charge. Her email is there. You might want that at some point after I get finished talking. Feel free to fill her in. Guys, she is someone that you should know, and even though you don't have kids now, or if you do especially, but I really wish more people would get involved in understanding how education is affected, especially politically, because it's political just like everything else, but it's the one thing that affects our kids and our communities the most. So just make sure, keep that in mind. Next person I want to talk about is the Secretary of Education. The Federal Department of Education was created, does anybody know when it was created, just out of curiosity? 1979, that's how recent it is. It is not constitutionally mandated. You can pick up the U.S. Constitution, Dave, am I right? And you can't find it anywhere, correct? It was created under our friend Jimmy Carter. In my opinion, as an educator and someone who's been educated in education, the Federal Department of Education has done nothing for us. And I'm going to give you an analogy. It's kind of like this. Let's just take a farmer who's got a pond he wants to fill, and it's halfway full. For some reason, he thinks he can fill this pond by running out and grabbing a bucket of water and taking a scoop out of one end of the pond, and suddenly ponders that he can run down to the other end of the pond, dump it back in, and fill that pond back up to a level. Well, what happens as he's running? Water's splashing everywhere, right? That's what goes on with the bureaucracy of the Federal Department of Education. We donate here in the state of Missouri. Where does it come back to? Not always us. I was talking to Representative Alan Isett at an event we held in Clay County not too long ago, and Alan told us that, or I talked to him one-on-one, and I said, Alan, do we get anything out of the Federal Department of Education? Said, no, we're a donor state. Okay, so most school district funding is about 9% federal. It fluctuates depending upon various levels, but that's what the district I'm in, it's about 9%. So in the long run, yeah, that's a little bit of the pie. If it was gone, could we make it up other ways? Yeah, because we're getting our tax dollars back, and we can support it at the local level if we need to. Okay. Well, I want to get into who Arne Duncan is and why you need to know him. Arne Duncan was nominated by President Obama to be our Secretary of Education. And Arne Duncan is a highly qualified candidate because he has no degree in education, has never taught a day in his life, has no degree in administration, has never been a principal a day in his life.
Surprise.
But he ran the Chicago Public Schools for 6 years, which he took and ran it further into the ground.
Yep.
In his time period as Federal Department of Education, as head of Chicago Public Schools, they call him the CEO or CES or something like that in Chicago, violence in his district tripled in 6 years. And the reason it tripled is, and I'll get into this a little bit later, is he took these really aggressive turnaround models. He calls them models, there's no educational background for them. Would go in and shut schools down, which would cause kids to spray out everywhere inside the inner core, which would cause them to cross gang boundaries, and suddenly they're in someone else's boundaries, and violence ensues. Test scores did not improve inside the Chicago public school system, and they'll tell you they did, but they do not. We have a national test called the National Association of Educational Progress, NAEP, shows no increase over his time period in Chicago. He didn't do a thing for schools. Now, their state's tests claim that there was some increases. There's been some accusations of him teaching to the test. There's also been some accusations that there has been teachers who were encouraged to falsify grades while he was there. The people that benefited inside of Chicago were those that loved the charter school movement, because guess what? They were politically connected, and all the politically connected kids who had parents suddenly got into these charter schools, and everybody else is left to fend for themselves in the urban core of Chicago. We've all seen recently a video, I think, from Chicago. Remember the young man that got his head bashed in by a railroad tie? That's Chicago. That's the quality of education that those kids experience. And I think at the rate we're going, that's probably the quality of education we're going to be trying to spread across America with this guy in charge. I'm not a fan of him. I've got no respect for him. I have busted my tail to become a teacher. I have worked full-time, put myself through college, and he has never stood in front of a classroom. I've got no respect for that. He doesn't even know what I deal with in my classroom. So he is not going to tell me what's good educational policy. Amen. And that ought to offend all of you. So just something to think about. A few resources there from Missouri. There are 2 standing committees in the House on education. There is one in the Senate. Please feel free to look those up. If you have a representative that is on one of those, and what I tell you today concerns you, call them. The Missouri House Republicans are aware of Race to the Top. They don't like it. It has not been appropriated right now in any budget, and I'll get into why that matters here in a little bit. So we're kind of in a grace period with this, and I think it might be something that can't be stopped. And it's one of the reasons why I'm here, is I'm hoping that we can get some community involvement in stopping this program. Last there, your last resource, of course, is your local school board. How many in here have ever been to a local school board meeting, just by show of hands? Okay. I know they're boring sometimes. They don't talk about exciting things, and sometimes we don't feel as citizens that we know what's being talked about, because education is education, and we're not always experts in that. But we usually have a say-so one way or the other, and your opinion is warranted and encouraged. I would encourage you to take the time to attend a local school board meeting, or at least know who your local school board candidates and representatives are. I mean, a lot of times they're your neighbors. So what is Race to the Top? Race to the Top is a $4.35 billion grant that it was apportioned in ERA, the American Recovery, I can't even remember what it stands for, the stimulus act. $4.35 billion grant. Now that's the key word here. What's a grant? It's something we have to apply for, which we have done in the state of Missouri. I have included a few websites for you there, the Federal Department of Ed official website, the executive summary, which is where I'm going to pull some information from, and then the state summary as well, and the state website on Race to the Top. Please check those out, do a little bit of research, find out what they are. I'm going to start out with the federal summary and go through why it's something you need to be concerned about, and some of the things I see in it that I don't like. The way Race to the Top works is the grant, your state writes a grant. By the way, the Federal Department of Education estimated that it would take your state educational entity 680 hours to complete the grant application. Now, I don't know how many people we had working on it at DESE, but in my mind, that's a lot of overhead, and that's a lot of time spent on something that right now we're not even going to get. Okay, and I'm not saying I want it, but and I'll explain more what that means. There's 5 selection criteria. They are state success factors, which is 25%, standards and assessments, that's dealing with curriculum, and of course assessments, we all know what those are, 14%. Data systems to support instruction, which means we're going to track students with data, which in my opinion as an educator is actually a good thing, because data helps our instruction become better in the classroom. My wife and I both use data on our students. It matters. It really does matter. But I don't know that I want the federal government determining how I use data in my classroom. Great teachers and leaders is another 28%. Turning around the lowest achieving schools is 10%, and that's where we get into the turnaround model and all these things that Duncan thinks that is a good idea. And then a general selection criteria, which accounts for another 11%. And then there is 3%, and I just want to mention this for a second, on engineering. It has to do with getting more students into the engineering and mechanical and science fields. But I just find it cute that one of the ways the state gets this is because they make sure they include quote-unquote underrepresented groups into educational programs. So what that means is if you're a female or a minority, which I would love to have more of those people in the fields, but they need to be the ones to make that choice, and we shouldn't be making sure. It's a level playing field the way I approach the world, and I'm not going to benefit one student over another. They all have to compete for the things that they want to do in life. It shouldn't be something that's just handed to them.